All right, and like I said, everybody, thank you again for joining us at the webinar today. This is the National Renewable Energy Laboratories webinar regarding the SolarAPP. As many of you have been following the SolarAPP for since we kicked off the project in September, this is a follow-on webinar to the ones we've already held. And this one, we are really excited to talk about some of the work we've been doing in terms of testing and piloting the SolarAPP software. So really excited to jump in to the webinar today. We have a full agenda, so let's do it. For those of you that haven't participated on a SolarAPP webinar before, I did want to give you all some background material. Of course, this is NREL. We're one of 17 national laboratories, all housed within the U.S. Department of Energy. You can see NREL's campus here in Golden, Colorado. We're just located outside of Denver, Colorado. We have over 750 active partnerships with government, academia, and industry, including local governments. And the SolarAPP is one such partnership where we are working with both those industry and local government personnel to deliver the product. So really excited about that partnership, one among many that we have here at the laboratory. NREL's work, of course, we're most well known for the work we're doing around renewable energy, and solar permitting fits within that purview. But just so you're all aware, NREL does a lot more than just renewable power. We do focus on transportation, energy efficiency, and importantly, energy systems integration, taking all of these technologies, innovative technologies, and having them integrate together, work together on the grid to deliver a more efficient system. More efficient and effective system there, that is. And so today, though, we're going to talk a great deal about the sort of work we're doing around solar, but the SolarAPP itself also has some nice connections to transportation and energy storage, among other technologies that will ultimately be incorporated into the application. A bit of housekeeping before we get into the webinar. So first and foremost, for all of you on the call, a recording of the webinar will be made available after this meeting, so you can review the slides and all of the content there. Should you have any trouble following the webinar itself, just know, one, that there will be a recording thereafter that you can ultimately watch at your leisure to review anything that you might have missed. If you are experiencing trouble with audio, you might try a phone connection instead of a computer, or ultimately call IT support at GoToWebinar to help identify the issue. Importantly, if you have a question for any of the panelists about the SolarAPP during at any point in the conversation, please do throw it in the chat box that you can see within the GoToWebinar task toolbar, and you can put your question in there. Arthur Colston from RMI, one of our program leaders, will be reviewing all of those questions and answering some of the ones he can, and then teeing up others that we'll address at the Q&A portion at the end of the meeting. So again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and if we don't get to them today, we will happily respond to them going forward. So what's the agenda for today? I'm really excited again to give you guys all an update on the SolarAPP project, whether it's your first time participating in such a webinar or your third time. We have a lot to discuss and to provide details or insights to all of you, regardless of where you are in terms of your knowledge of the SolarAPP. We're also going to do a demo of the improved SolarAPP based on all of the feedback we've received since we put out our first version in April. So we'll be doing a demonstration of that and having all of our subject matter experts to go over some of the key elements that have changed in the application. We're also going to do that in the form of a video, so it'll be more interactive and live as opposed to what we've done in the past. We'll also have a roundtable with two of our partner jurisdictions that'll be piloting the SolarAPP going forward. So really excited to have colleagues from Oceanside and Modesto, California on the line to talk through some of their experiences thus far. They've also been really helpful to us in the testing of the platform itself, and so we'll be including them, including a discussion of their feedback in testing, as well as just an overview of all the testing that's happened thus far. And then we'll be talking a lot more detail today for the first time about how other jurisdictions might be able to pilot the SolarAPP in their communities, and we'll walk through the requirements needed to do that. And then we'll end with some discussion of next steps for the SolarAPP itself. So first and foremost, I'm going to kick this back to Harrison here on our team at SolarAPP to put a poll question up. I just want to get a sense from those entities on the call what their perspective is on the SolarAPP thus far. So as I mentioned before, some folks have been following the SolarAPP for some time, while other folks may have just come on board to hear about the SolarAPP. So this poll question is designed to get at that detail here. And so, Harrison, I'm not seeing it on our side, but do we have the poll question open for respondents?
We've got about 60% responded so far.
Oh, great. So we'll just give it another minute or two for folks to respond. Again, we're just trying to get a sense of where people are in terms of their knowledge of SolarAPP. So maybe another 30 or 15 seconds or so to answer this question. And just so folks know, on the webinar, we'll have a couple more poll questions. So keep that handy or be ready for our next one coming up. And so I think we can pause there. And Harrison, can we show the results, or are they already being displayed?
And if you're not seeing that, Jeff, you should be able to see it in the polls drop down on the right-hand side of your screen.
Oh, perfect. I can see it. Thank you. Great. So actually, we've got a great amount of distribution here. About 40% of the folks on the call are new to the SolarAPP, which is great. We're happy to have you. And then about 60% of you have some understanding of SolarAPP and where we are. So it's great to hear that. I'm really happy to see a bunch of new faces here virtually and a bunch of folks who have already heard of us. And so because we have such a diversity here, we are going to do a little bit of background on the SolarAPP to start. And so I can go back. I should be sharing my screen still, correct, Harrison? Yep. And so people can see my slides. Great. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit of background on the SolarAPP for folks. And so this isn't news to anyone that the residential PV markets are rapidly expanding, and they're going to continue to expand well into the future. One of the an issue that's arisen out of the fact that there are more and more PV applications coming into jurisdictions is there's a lot of positives to that in terms of getting more solar out there, more consumer choice, but there are some challenges that jurisdictions have to face because they are required to permit and inspect all of those systems. And they may have limited resources and not necessarily able to hire additional staff to process all the applications that they're getting. And so a lot of communities have moved to online permitting for other technologies, including solar, to help offset some of the burden that local governments face in terms of processing all these permit applications and conducting inspections. And so that's really what the Solar Automated Permit Processing Platform, SolarAPP, is designed to do or help to do, is to really reduce some of the resource constraints on AHJ personnel, help remove some of the cookie cutter solar projects that you might face in your queue, and allow you to streamline that analysis and review such that you can focus your personnel on the more difficult cases or on other permitting areas where they still have a lot of workload and a lot of work to do. And so the goal of this tool again is to help reduce those resource constraints and by a function hopefully increase solar deployment and enable the achievement of a lot of local governments' clean energy and economic development goals. And so as I mentioned, the key goal of SolarAPP is to help automate some of the plan set review that's conducted now for solar projects. And to do that on an online, flexible platform that's offered at no cost to jurisdictions. So as many of you know on the call, that it's not news to you that you're struggling to process permits, but it's also not necessarily possible for you to buy new software to help address that challenge or to incorporate solar into the software that you already have. And so the tool itself will be offered at no cost to jurisdictions, and what it does is it evaluates solar applications for safety and code compliance based on the model 2017 National Electrical Code and the 2018 International Building Code, International Residential Code as well, and it'll deliver automated instant plan review and permit approval or rejection depending on that code compliance review that the software does. Importantly, we're going to incorporate energy storage and expand to other market segments as well once we've got residential solar launched into the market after the pilot phase. And so this work, NREL is the lead organization on delivering the SolarAPP, but we're in partnership with a wide variety of organizations as including those listed here, which are code officials, jurisdictions, contractors, of course, and then other subject matter experts, all working together to develop this SolarAPP to ultimately help jurisdictions to deliver their important safety and code compliance review services, and just doing it in a more efficient way. So this group of organizations has been working with NREL to develop the SolarAPP, including the permitting requirements, that we incorporated into the application. Those organizations, among others, have been vetting those and then ultimately testing the software functionality in terms of alignment with the requirements that we've developed. And that's how we got to where we are today. Importantly, we're now moving into the pilot phase of the application, where you'll hear from some of the jurisdictions that are going to pilot with us some of the next steps there. So that's what the heart of this webinar is going to be about, in addition to that demonstration of the software itself. And then just to let you guys know, we are moving from here into the launch and transition phases of the application. So launch, we're hoping in October for a widespread launch of the application for many jurisdictions to adopt beyond those piloters. And then also, just so folks know, that we are transitioning the SolarAPP from NREL to a long-term program manager on the timeline that you see here. So happy to announce we put out a notice to interested candidates to let us know that they'd like to take up the SolarAPP, and we're going to identify a shortlist and announce a finalist before the calendar year concludes. So really excited now to walk a little bit through some of the test results. So like I said, we vetted the requirements with that set of partners, code officials and contractors alike. And then we've ultimately had a set of testing jurisdictions to help us to review applications put through the SolarAPP and compare those with or to evaluate the outputs that come out of the SolarAPP for code compliance. And so you can see there's 3 jurisdictions that have been piloting with us, or testing with us since the beginning, really. That's Bakersfield, Modesto, and Oceanside, all of which have been testing with us thus far. And now that we're moving into the piloting phase, we are having another set of entities that started testing a bit later than these other California communities. That's both Denver and Boulder County, Colorado. We're really excited, or the city and county of Denver, along with Boulder County. So really excited to have them included in the set of testing communities, as well as potentially interested in piloting thereafter. So ultimately, regardless of the communities that were involved in the process, you can see here what we ultimately did in terms of how we completed testing. So in short, it's a partnership, and it has been a partnership between the SolarAPP, contractors, and authorities having jurisdiction. And ultimately, it's a kind of a 2-pronged approach, where a contractor completes a SolarAPP permit application. In that process, they helped us identify any issues where a system might not have been approved when it should have been approved, and they can help us understand if there were any glitches in the application itself. Then ultimately, local governments would then review the SolarAPP applications for code compliance, all the documentation, and importantly, they would do a side-by-side comparison with their existing permit application that they would receive with that particular project. And so they were doing that side-by-side comparison, both helped those entities to understand, or the local governments to understand what they were getting out of SolarAPP, but also they could look at the traditional plans to identify if there was anything missing in the SolarAPP platform application that needed to be in there. Importantly, it was just testing, of course, so they were helping us identify ways to improve the application, and each jurisdiction was continuing to use their existing permit process to actually receive a permit. So it was completely testing or been separate and apart from actually getting a permit. Here's just a quick summation of the test results thus far. So ultimately, about 100 applications were submitted into the SolarAPP during our testing phase. And there's just some descriptions here. The figure on the right just demonstrates that, there's some diversity in terms of where the projects were submitted and what, communities were reviewing what. And then you can also see on the left the different types of inverter architectures. So there was a lot of string inverter testing going on, but there's 4 inverter architectures included in the application that also got some amount of testing, including AC modules and microinverters. So some diversity certainly in those test results thus far. So that all of the testing was really valuable in that it helped us to do a lot of improvements to the app, and big thank you to all of the testers, and that the SolarAPP was being actively updated throughout the whole testing period and phases. So big shout out to everyone that was involved in the testing phase, because it was certainly really valuable to get all of their perspective and again make the improvements that ultimately you all are going to see in the demonstration now. So really excited for that. Before I get started, I'm going to of course lead us through the demonstration, but I'm going to tap a variety of subject matter experts and some of our work group leads to join in and chime in to provide some color to each of the phases of the application process, to give everyone on the call a bit more of a well-rounded understanding of how the SolarAPP works and functions. And so ultimately, I'm just going to introduce folks really quickly, and then they'll be chiming in. As called upon. So we have Charles Picard, Kyle Bruning, Val Anderson, and Nick Gordon. All will be some of our subject matter experts providing perspective. And so when they chime in for the first time, they'll let you know who they are, so you can put a voice to a name during the demonstration. And now, before I get started, I wanted to clarify a couple of things ahead of time. So what we're doing here is not a full demonstration of, say, how you might register or sign up to use the SolarAPP, how you might build a profile, review a dashboard of permit applications you might collect or receive as a contractor or jurisdiction to review. Instead, the demonstration today is going to be focused on the heart of the application itself, which is really the permit application. And so where we're going to start the demonstration, and I'm going to do it here as a video, and so we'll have a video running, and then we'll go ahead and speak over the video for folks on the call as well. And so what we're going to do is start right as a contractor would open or create a new project in their dashboard. So as a jurisdiction, this isn't necessarily what you would see, but it is valuable to understand what a contractor is filling out and what the application looks like in terms of how they input the information, so that you'll have a better understanding too about the outputs that you'll be reviewing. And certainly for contractors and jurisdictions alike, we'll be talking about those outputs in great detail. And so with that, I'm going to now move over to our demonstration. And so bear with me for a second while I get that set up here to start. So now I've got the video up, and Harrison just confirmed for me that the video is showing on your side.
Give it 1 second to get going. You may need to play it. It may be ready to go.
No problem. All right, I'm going to do that just to get it started here, folks, and then we will jump into it. So starting the video. All right, and now I think, Harrison, you should be seeing the video, correct?
Yep, we're good.
Awesome. All right, so I went ahead and quick paused this video just so folks can see where we're at. So first, you'll start on an address page as a contractor, and here's where you'll put your project details, as well as file or complete the SolarAPP eligibility checklist. Now, the SolarAPP eligibility checklist is a really important document, and I paused it here as well just to let you see it for a little bit longer. So first and foremost, rooftop residential PV systems are all that qualify right now, but there's a lot of requirements integrated or embedded into that that would prohibit someone from completing an application. And so what we're trying to do is have a contractor be able to review this checklist before getting too far into the application, so that they know, oh, okay, there's PV existing on site, so okay, I'm not eligible to use SolarAPP. And then they would have to follow the traditional process or alternative process for those not eligible projects. Again, the focus of the SolarAPP is to take all those cookie cutter projects, the easy ones out that you see all the time, like 80% of projects. So get those removed from your queue via the SolarAPP, so that you can focus on some of these more challenging things. In addition, this eligibility checklist will evolve as we incorporate new updates like the 2020 NEC, as well as possibly allowing for existing PV in future iterations. So ultimately, you can see, yeah, there's still a variety of items on this checklist to consider, but ultimately you can complete your attestation, and then before you can move on, you would input the address and make sure it's validated in the jurisdiction, and incorporate any license information. And assuming if you didn't answer any of these questions correctly, you would be prohibited from moving on from this page, or if you didn't answer. So ultimately, from that address page, you're moved to the fire page, which is reflected here. And so this is where I'm going to actually pause and invite Charles back into the conversation. And then, Charles, I'm actually going to hit play here on the video again. And then just FYI to just make sure you unmute yourself again.
Thanks, Jeff. You could go ahead and pause again, just to give me a second here. Hi, everyone. We've taken a pretty simple approach to this, to compliance with the fire safety related language found both in the NEC and the International Residential Code. What you saw quickly on that first page was a little checkbox. It takes a form of an attestation where the contractor is going to confirm that they've reviewed the requirements that you see on your screen now. This is a reference document that sort of lives behind the scene and behind that attestation, and it's linked on that page that you saw briefly on the SolarAPP site. So there would be a link that brings you to this PDF document that rolls through the specific requirements that cover, you know, all the basics of residential PV system installation, signage, disconnecting means, and fire setbacks. So Jeff, you go ahead and click play. Okay, so when we look through those requirements and some illustrations for these setbacks, we understand that most of this is going to be actually verified at the time of inspection. So to that end, we've continued to update this section based on much of the feedback we've gotten from some of our AHJ stakeholders. And some recent changes include those questions that you see there. Does the home have sprinkler systems? You know, what's the total area of the roof that would trigger some additional requirements that relate to setbacks? Moving forward, we'd like to build in some questions that kind of further refine the outputs and would limit the illustrations that you see, those diagrams of those setbacks, to ones that are relevant to the home. So it would include like specifics, whether or not the roof has hips or valleys, and different layout specifics in order to make that inspection smoother and easier for the inspector. So with that, that's it in a nutshell. Val, I'm not sure if you had anything else to add to the fire setback or fire related code section. I'll pass it to you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Charles. Nailed it. Did want to add or give a little bit more detail into what you mentioned about that sort of back-end calculation. So since one of the main, two of the main criteria in determining which setbacks apply to a certain site are whether or not the home has sprinklers and also what percentage of the roof is covered by the array. We are actually able to do the back-end calculation of how much the array is covering by later on you'll see that we select the contractor will have to select what module they use, and then we back-end tie that to the CEC, which is able to give us the surface area of that module, and taking the number of modules, we're able to do the calculation that shows what percentage of the roof is actually covered. So just wanted to highlight that just with one simple question about the roof area, we're able to determine which diagrams will apply to that site. So that's it. Thanks.
And thanks, Val. So yeah, I'm going to start us off here again. And then from there, we end up moving to the structural page. And so I want to invite Nick Gordon from our structural team to discuss the structural page. And Nick, I'm going to start this demo up again, so then you'll have to unmute yourself as we discussed.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead and let this play. The structural qualification method for SolarAPP, Jeff, you can probably give it a pause. It moves pretty quickly. It's quite a short portion of the SolarAPP itself. But the qualification portion for structural within SolarAPP is based on just ensuring a safe and code compliant installation and keeping the process as simple and streamlined as possible. The qualification method is supported by some prescriptive compliance approaches within the current international model codes for additions and alterations to existing structures, just verifying that the PV system doesn't impose more than a minimal impact compared to the way that the structure was originally designed to support. So not every single home is going to qualify for this procedure, and I'll touch on a few of the things we can see on the screen here right now. And also indicate some of the changes that we've made since the last iteration that some of you may have seen in previous webinars, which one of the first questions that was proposed in the structural qualification section was a question about the build age of the home. What year was the home constructed in? And there were a lot of questions and feedback about why that question was being asked, because it's not necessarily codified anywhere. We're already addressing some of the concerns with, potential issues with structure, excessive deflection, damage from water, termites, things of that nature during a visual inspection prior to installation. So that question was removed upon, multiple jurisdictions providing feedback for that in the initial feedback sections. So just going through this quickly, one of the first questions that's critical to establish qualification within those prescriptive compliance procedures is the weight of the PV system. So anything above 4 pounds per square foot is currently not qualified via SolarAPP. We ask the question to contractors whether this is a flush mount parallel to the roof plane or a tilt-up system, because there are some provisions within ASE 7 that are slightly different for how what the mounting height can be from the roof surface and how that plays into some of the load calculations to ensure we're meeting those prescriptive provisions. That's that following question there, which for flush mount systems, they must be less than 10 inches from the roof surface, and for tilt up systems on low slope roofs, they must be greater in order to adequately calculate the loads and understand where live load must be or must not be applied. There's a limitation of 24 inches from the roof surface. So that question that's asked has multiple implications in the back-end calculations to determine whether or not the application is qualified for structural. Asking how many distinct roof planes will be used for the installation allows us to check to see if we're installing on multiple different roof types. And this is the question here of wood shake is not qualified via SolarAPP. There's plenty of concerns with that that I'm sure many of you are aware of, but establishing the weight of the roof covering is important also for understanding those prescriptive compliance methods. And in addition, there are some restrictions based on those roof types when we have particular snow loads. You can go ahead and hit play again there, Jeff.
And then Nick, real quickly, just make sure you unmute yourself again.
Oh, sorry, Jeff, thanks. You can go ahead and pause it one more time. So the other questions that we're posing to applicants are the number of layers of comp shingle that are present. If there are any more than 2 layers present, that's also not qualified for SolarAPP. Understanding the pitch of the roof surface, the local ground snow load will eventually be a question that is proposed during the onboarding process for individual jurisdictions. But the question of whether or not the mounting hardware is rated to withstand the downward forces of that local snow load and the uplift forces from the local wind speed will be attestations by the contractor and substantiated by including cut sheets from the manufacturer of the attachment and mounting system. And the final question that we want to establish is that the roof structure appears to be structurally sound without any signs of alterations or significant structural deterioration or sagging. This is a question that is a piece of many existing solar permitting guidebooks around the country that is meant to establish that level of quality construction and any particular red flags that might be exacerbated by the addition of a solar system. So as long as these questions are answered within the confines of what SolarAPP is qualifying at this time, the applicants will move forward, and all of this information is then provided on the inspection checklist, which I think we'll go through later. But that's about it for structural. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Nick. Really appreciate that. And from here, we move to the electrical page, again, assuming that you answer all the questions appropriately here on the structural page. And like I said, ultimately, you'll move from this page to that electrical page, and then we're going to have Kyle Bruning. I'm going to pause it here. Kyle Bruning is going to join us on from the electrical team lead. So Kyle, if you would unmute yourself, thanks, and introduce yourself and what we're doing on the electrical side.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, everyone. I am on the electrical working group. The other primary co-contributor is out of the office this week, but Mark Rodriguez is a very strong addition to the progress we've made in this section. So in this example, again, just walking through, we have a lot of equipment that we're identifying, just example equipment here. As
Kyle, I'm gonna press play so they can see some of the equipment, but then you'll just have to unmute yourself again.
So as Val mentioned earlier, we clue into the CEC equipment database list, and that helps create this list of equipment, and as well as some of the equipment characteristics for it. Maybe you could pause it again, Jeff, here.
Sure.
That database list does not include everything here. For example, there is not a mounting hardware equipment list yet, where we are working with the NERDLs to try and create these databases. We do ask for data sheets to be uploaded, and where some of these questions are also currently in progress of being automated. We are being able to clue into more and more of the equipment specifications. And so in this current example may not reflect a future example, but only because certain questions, for example, is an inverter or a module listed to a certain certification, that will be automated, and that will be ensured as only an available option if it is a certified piece of equipment. So that's the equipment portion at the top. And then we start getting into some of the site-specific conditions, talking about temperatures, voltages, and main panel equipment for the point of connection. Jeff, if you could keep the demo rolling.
Sure. And then just make sure to unmute yourself again there, Kyle. But here you are also seeing the install details and the circuit requirements that are also going to be required input into the tool. And you can see there are some calculations already happening here in terms of the maximum quantity of modules that you can have and how many strings you can have in parallel. I'm going to pause it here, though, to talk about some of the interconnection pieces as well. So yeah, Kyle, you're
Yeah, I had some troubles unmuting there. I think we passed the attestation portion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we asked for a number of attestations. Those all confirm that some of the back-end calculations that we are completing are accurate and applicable. Things like wire sizing, when we're looking up ampacities for wires to do calculations and make sure they are appropriate for the equipment called out. That wire is of specific strands, insulation type, that conduit is mounted in certain ways. Those all affect some of the code compliance calculations that we're doing and are fairly standard among the industry is what we found in the working group. So not 100% of projects are applicable, but we do see it as a very significant portion being compatible. This section here, interconnection, is where we are doing the code compliance math for under 705.12. So checking based on the panel sizes that were input earlier and the inverter sizes that were selected or the inverter equipment selected, if that's meeting the selected code compliance method. I think that's all for just a highlight of the electrical section. We continue to work on it with the priority being on how to automate it and make it more accurate with less contractor inputs, as well as expanding how many projects are applicable.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And we'll start, again, like I said, once you move from the electrical page, you end up on the workman's comp page. I'm going to start the video again here as we move over to payments. So ultimately, from this page, it'll be customizable, but really for the jurisdictions to identify that you have all the required licenses and certifications to complete the work. Assuming then you do, you would agree to the terms or requirements listed here, and you can submit the project. And then from submitting the project, you ultimately, at this point, the tool is reviewing all of your application, developing all the PDFs and the outputs to confirm whether you were approved or not. And then it compiles that all here into these documents. So I'm going to pause it here and invite Val Anderson into the conversation to chat through what we're seeing on this preview page. So Val, I'm going to go ahead and start the video again here, and then just make sure you unmute yourself.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So yeah, as Jeff mentioned, this is the preview page, which means that the contractor is able to take a look at what the tool has done before they pay for it. And the good part about this is that it dives in, as you can see in that permit long form. It's showing every single input that was put in there. It's showing the calculations that it's doing on the back end, and it's showing the references that it pulled from the CEC. Here's a little example of the maximum DC voltage for a string inverter without DC-DC converters. It will also take a look at what wire size you would be required to have, what the minimum wire size is there for DC and for AC, and it's calculating conduit size. And then it's also going to be diving into it takes inverter continuous output current into account for calculating the overcurrent protection device sizes, and it looks at the EGC wire size that should be there, and depending on what interconnection method you've chosen for your compliance method of tying into the main panel or your point of interconnection, it'll show you what's relevant there. It shows for the structural pieces what you've input and what it's calculated for you, and then also the bulletin that you've attested to on the fire side. And so if you could pause it real quick, Jeff. Just one note about the inspections checklist, because it would happen there real quick at the beginning. The goal, as you saw, two different documents there, the two different functions that they serve. The inspections checklist is what we are thinking would make the most sense for the jurisdiction to be looking at during the time of inspection as what's produced and output by the SolarAPP, what the product of the SolarAPP is. And the goal there is to make the list very short and concise, clear, with all the necessary items that need to be checked from an inspector on site, with emphasis on workmanship, knowing that the tool did the back end pieces, a lot of the back end pieces for them. It would have the cut sheets attached so that they can verify those as well, and then have the fire bulletin with the specific diagrams attached there as well. And so the idea is that instead of a myriad of different industry players, contractors having all different types of plan sets, the SolarAPP will produce one, and so the jurisdiction would then understand what the SolarAPP plan set is doing and be able to unify and get solar inspections into a very clear, concise pattern. So that's it. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Val. And yeah, plenty to discuss and go over here, so happy to answer any questions folks may have going forward. Ultimately, though, assuming the preview looks good, you get to the payment page. I'm going to restart our video here. So from the payment page, as everyone knows, there will be a fee the contractor has to pay to input or to complete the application, depending on what mode of the software use you're using. So here we are using what we're using for Oceanside, which is our model to integrate SolarAPP into an existing software platform, and that's what we're doing here. There's another approach to have this to be a standalone version, and we'll be happy to talk through that too in the Q&A. But I'm going to start the webinar again, because ultimately once you've paid, it's not done. In this context, you still need to file for the Oceanside permit, but you do have an approved plan, which is a really critical piece to ensure you can do instant approval. So I'm going to start this again. And so here's the applications that you will get. So just to note that this is a test project. So right now it's not real, which is why you're seeing some of the errors listed here. But ultimately you'll download an approval document, and you'll get an approval ID, both of which you can then upload into for example, in the context of Oceanside, which we're piloting with, you upload these documents into their existing platform, and then you can go through that to finalize and pay for your permit. But here's that checklist again Val was mentioning to help guide the process. And again, you get the full long form, and then this would be uploaded again for the permitting staff. You'll also actually get your uploaded data sheets, and any other uploads will be included here. You saw there were some test documents in there. They would ultimately be included as well. And so that is a look into the webinar itself. And so let me get now back to the webinar. So I've got the screen showing again here. And so Harrison, could you just confirm that you're seeing the slide deck on your side?
Looking good. Yeah.
Great. And then if the panelists wouldn't mind just quick muting themselves as well, that would be great. So now I'm really excited to introduce the next portion of the discussion, which is to hear directly from some of the communities that are partnering with us in piloting. So we've got two great colleagues on the call, Steve Jones from Oceanside, Oscar Diaz from Modesto. Oscar and Steve, can we check to make sure your audio is live? If you go ahead and unmute yourself, looks like you are. And Oscar, would you mind introducing yourself?
Oscar. Yes, good morning, everybody. This is Oscar Diaz with the city of Modesto. We're located in the Central Valley of California.
Awesome, thanks, Oscar. And Steve, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, Steve Jones. I'm the assistant building official with the city of Oceanside. I'm the past president of the International Association of Electrical Inspectors and one of the founding members of the Sustainable Energy Action Committee. Grateful to be here today and working with NREL.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for the intro, Steve, and we're happy to have both of you on the call. So we've got a list of questions here, and we're a little behind schedule, so let's just jump right into it and get started. So I'm going to start this one for Steve to take the crack at it first. And could you just tell us why you decided to pilot with SolarAPP today?
So, you know, as a jurisdiction, we get a lot of things that are forced fed to us. And so I really think it's important to be be upfront and be involved in these kind of programs immediately. I had a colleague, a mentor once tell me, and continually tell me that, Steve, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I really think that that's true. And so I believe that what you're doing is important. I am a founding member of the Sustainable Energy Action Committee. What does that mean to you? Well, I'm dedicated to the rapid deployment of safely installed renewable energy. I think it's good for the United States. I certainly think it's great for California, and I'm sure it's great for Oceanside.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Steve. Yeah, and Oscar, same question to you, and feel free just to add on to or what Steve said.
Yes, so just adding on to Steve, the solar industry is big in California. Our policymakers have passed legislation that requires jurisdictions to expedite solar permits. Here in California, we have, well, most jurisdictions have 3 days to process a solar permit. As you can imagine, that puts a huge burden on your plan checkers and your permit techs. So we're kind of looking at SolarAPP as a way to help alleviate some of that burden.
Yeah, thanks for that, Oscar. And now I'm going to move to the next question and tee that one up for you, Oscar, to start us. And could you just speak a little bit too, and you kind of already alluded to it, some of the strain that's on your plan checkers now, but how will SolarAPP help you meet your agency's workload and then ultimately just overall improve your jurisdiction and the services you provide?
Yes, so for Modesto, it all comes down to resources. Because of increased expenses and budget cuts due to COVID, we've been asked to do more with less. I'm sure other jurisdictions are feeling the same thing. But SolarAPP is going to free up some of our permit techs to concentrate on making sure we get complete plans on our more complex and substantial projects, such as new commercial and just some of the residential subdivisions. It'll allow us to invest more time on communication and coordination with our customers and to build better relationships with our clients.
Thanks, Oscar. And yeah, Steve, same question to you.
Well, I have to agree with Oscar. It all goes to our resources and how to allocate those resources when you have workloads. Oceanside, we're a small jurisdiction, probably 64 square miles, 184,000 people living in the city of Oceanside. But we do a pretty heavy load when you talk about permits. I issue probably, in 2019, I issued over 5,000 permits. I issued 1,800 of those permits were PV plans. And so that's 1/3 of all the plan reviewing I'm doing is on PV plans. I only have 4 plan checkers, that's including myself. And so we do about 150 PV plan reviews a month. And so if I could get this process automated, it would improve my ability to work on other projects. Again, being efficient in my resources, I have a lot of large projects in the city of Oceanside. I have mid-rise hotels, 7 stories tall with 2 floors of underground parking going on. The city is, we have a large pharmaceutical area in the city, which takes a whole lot of our plan review time and our inspection times. In fact, I have one pharmaceutical company that just one building has over 5 miles of process piping inside the building. And so this is an intense plan review and an intense inspection. And so if I could find something that could automate the solar permitting process, why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I relieve some of the pressure that's on my staff now with all these PV plans that we're doing?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And that does feed right into what we're interested in doing here, Steve, as you and Oscar both know, is to help you just to manage your workload more effectively, especially with solar being projects and permits just becoming such a larger number there. So now that you've both been testing with us and moving to the pilot phase, what would you like to share about your experience working with SolarAPP, NREL, and the team broadly? And maybe, yeah, we'll start with Oscar again on this one.
I would say that the process has been pretty smooth. I've been involved in several software implementation processes. A big part of that is actually testing the systems. And to be honest, that can be rather tedious, but I'm a plan checker at heart, and testing SolarAPP was kind of fun for me, because basically I was just trying to find the errors that the computer was making versus what the plans were showing. So for me, as a plan checker at heart, that was pretty fun. Everyone at NREL and the solar contractors, they've been very professional, and I'm really proud to have been part of this effort.
And thanks for that, Oscar. Definitely appreciate that. We certainly appreciate your involvement. And Steve, yeah, what are your thoughts and your experience?
Well, I have to say that my experience with working with the NREL folks on this project has been a pleasure. It's been trying at times, trying to understand at first what we were doing, and getting away from a physical set of plans and then going to the long form. It was trying at first, but I think everything that I've done in this process has worked out well. I've come back with suggestions and recommendations to the team on things that I've found wrong with the software, and they've been very responsive about making those changes and implementing those suggestions. And to me, that's what you really want to see from an organization that you're working with. You want to see that they're taking your recommendations, those things that you're finding wrong with the app, and trying to work on them and implement them into the app and make a better app. And so, again, my experience has been very, very good, very professional group of individuals.
Thanks, Steve. And then we'll start with the last question, and I'll tee this one up for Oscar to start as well. So what would you say to some other cities that might, say they're already, doing better than average, right? The best practice right now for SolSmart, if you've heard of that program, is 3 days for permitting turnaround. So what would you say to them in terms of opting for instant permitting via SolarAPP? What's the value there? So we'll start with you, Oscar, on that question.
Yes, thanks. I would say that SolarAPP does create uniformity and takes away some of the unknown factors that contractors may run into when working with different jurisdictions. When we first trained our permit techs to review solar, we created an Excel spreadsheet, kind of like a database that made all the calculations based on inverters and panels that they selected, but it was very labor intensive to keep that database updated with like the latest panels and inverter information. But the idea of using software to plan checks, not a new concept for us, but having NREL kind of run that software is going to be a huge time saver for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good to know. And then Steve, yeah, we'll pass this question to you.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when you think about it, why is the city of Oceanside participating in this? I can honestly say to you that we can approve our plans, our PV plans, in less than 24 hours. In fact, I like to tell my customers that you can submit your plans online through our portal. You can go ahead and go brew your coffee, get your coffee, come back to your computer, and when you come back to your computer, you'll have an approved set of plans there. And so, yeah, why would we want to partner with NREL if we're already doing this? Well, again, I think it all goes to the resources and the use of our resources, effective uses of our resources. Someone needs to do these plan reviews. So I'm taking a plan checker or several plan checkers to do these plan reviews. So what are they doing? They're being removed from some of these more difficult jobs to do these PV plan reviews. I'm not saying that the PV plan reviews are simple. No, there are some very complicated issues with PV installations. We're all looking for a safe installation. So I'm not trying to say that at all. But I think that if I could use the app to get me through this process of approving 1,800 of these PV plans that I'm doing and 150 of them a month, that would be a great relief from my staff. And so, yeah, I think it's a great thing. I think the app is a great thing. And so what I would encourage everybody else that's out there now listening, and AHJ specifically, please ask to test and pilot this app. The more people we have looking at it, and the more people we have beat it up, just really beat this thing up. Let's find all the bugs. Let's find everything wrong with it so we can have an app that we can spit out and we can all feel confident about. I encourage everybody to beat up this app, get involved. And that's why the city of Oceanside's involved, is because we want to be a partner with this. We want to see this work. We think it would be a relief for not only jurisdictions in the state of California, but throughout the nation.
Agreed, and thanks so much for that, Steve. And in fact, we do have a couple of communities already have taken the call of Steve and are going to help test outside, of course, of California, including those in Colorado and elsewhere. And now, Harrison, I'd actually like to jump to our poll question number 2 and put it out to the group, all the folks on the call today, whether or not you would be interested in learning more about piloting the SolarAPP, or what that process looks like, what you're thinking about that. And we'll give folks a couple of minutes or seconds here to respond to that. So we're getting some great feedback here. A lot of folks are interested in piloting, which is awesome. And then even some folks there that, of course, are interested in getting some more information in terms of what's going to be needed to pilot. Like, what does that mean in my jurisdiction, and how would I actually do it? And luckily for you folks, we have a little bit more of a presentation to go through on that end. And then just so folks are aware, we are actually at the time of our regularly scheduled webinar. And so we are going to go a little bit over here. For those of you that have to jump off, that's okay. You'll be getting a recording of the webinar anyway, but we'll be moving into the piloting testing phase, or what is required for piloting. So I'm going to take first my synopsis from that poll is there's a lot of folks we'll be reaching out to in terms of the to tell you how to pilot, and we'll start that conversation right here. And so first and foremost for folks, and again, I want to thank Steve and Oscar of Modesto and Oceanside for really being the guinea pigs and helping out a lot. They've really helped us think through what kind of training and education is needed to actually adopt and use the SolarAPP, as well as figuring out how to most effectively run subsequent pilots, working with folks going forward. So ultimately what this will be is, again, another partnership to implement the pilot, where we'll be engaging not just the permitting personnel, but by IT, finance, and inspection to get everybody in together to discuss how to integrate SolarAPP into your existing workflow, whether it's using an online platform already or something standalone. And so as I mentioned, is a partnership, again, to figure out how the pilot works. There are 3 general steps. So first is the education and training. So helping folks to understand how to use the SolarAPP, how it would work, getting contractors aware of how to use it and actually run projects through it. And then ultimately from that training, we'd move to step 2, where we would run a set of SolarAPP eligible projects through the platform, whichever platform makes sense for the community in question. And then have the jurisdiction make sure that they got all the applications, all the permit funds went where they were needed to go, the inspection materials were all created properly, et cetera. And then ultimately from the lessons learned of that set of projects and that initial run, then there'd be the step 3 where you can consider how we would expand from a pilot to a full deployment phase, whether that looks different from how the pilot was set up or what have you. So that's generally how the pilot will work. There are a lot of jurisdictions that mentioned they were interested, as I mentioned on that poll previously. And so we're doing the piloting in 2 phases. It'd be great if we could pilot with everyone tomorrow, but given resource constraints, we have to think about a structure or a queuing process. And so you can see here, we'll have a phase 1 and a phase 2 of piloting. The first phase is going to be kicking off very soon, even with those communities where we've already kicked off the conversations. So we're thinking about 5 to 10 AHJs in the first phase, and then an additional 5 to 10, depending, possibly more in the second phase, depending on the software that's included. And back to what sort of Steve and Oscar were saying at the beginning, is that the goal here is to help, and I mentioned at the beginning as well, the goal here is to make sure that this is valuable to jurisdictions in terms of helping reduce your workload and ensure systems that are permitted are code compliant. And so NREL will be conducting a separate analysis of the impact of adopting SolarAPP in these pilot jurisdictions. How much time and energy was saved in terms of going this process as compared to the traditional process, and as well as tracking a variety of metrics related to permitting in general. So that piloting analysis will be unfolding in parallel, and we would be announcing the results of that when we go to our widespread launch in October, either the preliminary results or the full finalized results, depending on the staging of the phases. And so if you are interested in piloting the SolarAPP, thanks for completing the poll. But also there's the SolarAPP interest questionnaire, which is another way for communities to review or get involved faster. So the questionnaire itself has a couple of key basic questions about how you set up your permit fees, what kind of software platform you're using, and a variety of other types of questions that can help us to understand where you might fit into our permitting or our piloting queue. So there's a link here to that, and we're happy to share that with you going forward. So you're more than welcome to complete that questionnaire. If you still, of course, have questions, you can contact us at solarapp@nrel.gov. And so for the purposes of time, I'm going to end here with our next step slide. So ultimately, as I mentioned, we're pushing towards a widespread adoption date in October. But at the same time as we've been piloting on the residential solar side, we'll also be doing a lot of work to incorporate the 2020 NEC I articulated earlier, considering energy storage and including that in the application. If you have ideas about how we might, what other technologies would be valuable to include, like commercial systems or retrofit PV, just let us know via emailing us at the solarapp@nrel.gov. And we'll also be sending out notices about the selection of our long-term host upcoming. And for everyone to stay involved, please do check out our website or sign up for the newsletter to be able to learn more. So I did put up a couple of links here to that website, which is solarapp.nrel.gov. There's been a variety of webinars. We put out a one-pager on some of the potential benefits as well listed there. So ultimately, we are over time. So I want to thank everyone for all of the questions that you submitted into the chat function. We'll be reviewing those and getting back to you as soon as we can with responses to those. I will pause there for 1 second and say, Arthur, is there any kind of burning question you think we should end on before closing out the webinar?
I've been trying to answer them in the actual questions. So I think we've gotten through a lot of the big ones. And awesome. Yeah, so nothing too pressing. I'll continue to be answering them in here. So folks who asked questions, hopefully I get to you.
All right, thanks so much, Arthur. And I want to thank everyone for joining the call today and learning more about the SolarAPP. I'll just leave you with this and the call to action from Steve Jones as we actively look forward to piloting with every jurisdiction that's on the call today, as well as those that weren't able to make it. So we look forward to working with you. And like I said, follow up with us at solarapp@nrel.gov to get on board. So with that, I'm going to end the webinar there and thank everyone for their time.